my name's Sophia Gervais. I'm a clinical psychologist at Unmind, and I'm here today with John Malesic to have a conversation about burnout. Hi, John.
Hi, good to see you, Sophia.
Good to see you too. I wonder if we could start off by having you introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Malesic. I'm the author of the book, The End of Burnout, Why Work Drains Us and How to Build Better Lives. And I've been interested in burnout for about the last 6 years or so. And my interest is primarily because it happened to me. I had been a theology professor at a small college in the United States, and this was my dream job. And I was fully invested in the work, and my identity was totally wrapped up with this job. And at some point, things started to go badly in the job. I struggled to get out of bed. I had a difficult time planning my classes. I sometimes had a difficult time getting to my classes on time. Just everything about the job felt like a great burden. And I should say that while this was going on, one of my academic research and teaching interests had to do with the moral and spiritual questions that arise from our working lives. And so I was teaching this class called Why Work, while at the same time trying to answer that question in my own life. Eventually, things got so bad that the only thing left to do was to quit the job. And I did that 6 years ago. And in the weeks and months after my decision to resign, and being a researcher at heart, I tried to understand what had happened to me and connect it to those questions that I had been exploring in my teaching all those years. And so I came across the term burnout as a phenomenon that seemed to explain what had happened to me. And as I kept researching, I found that it touched on a whole cultural problem that not just me, but millions of other workers were enduring. And so I tried to connect those, my new understanding of burnout with those old questions that I had been researching for a long time. And the book is kind of my bringing of those things together to make a comprehensive argument about our burnout culture, why we have it, why we're stuck in it, and how we might be able to get beyond it.
I think you bring such a unique perspective with those two lenses. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what you have to say today. I guess my first question is, I guess recently, and especially during the pandemic, burnout has been a buzzword that we've heard a lot. And it seems like sometimes the meaning of it gets a bit diluted. So I guess I thought it would be helpful to start today with a question of what actually is burnout, if you could talk us through that.
So my general definition of burnout is that it's the chronic experience of being stretched between your ideals for work and the reality of your job. So we bring ideals to work. We expect work to fulfill us, to give us meaning, to give us purpose. I mean, of course, we expect work to give us a salary, and burnout is partly about that, but it's also about all of these more abstract ideals that we take to work. And when those ideals are at some distance from the reality, so there's they just don't line up. We go in expecting purpose, but we do work that seems purposeless. We go in expecting dignity, but we are treated in an undignified way at work. And if that happens over a long enough time, then we experience what is called burnout. The more specific and scientific definition is that burnout is a syndrome with 3 dimensions: exhaustion, which I think is familiar to many of us, though the exhaustion of burnout often does not go away with rest. It's a more of a chronic state that arises from that mismatch between ideals and reality. So exhaustion, cynicism, or sometimes called depersonalization, where you are frustrated with the people you work with. You treat them as less than the full human beings that they are, or you emotionally distance yourself from them. You become cold and disengaged, which can be really toxic depending on the kind of work that you do. When your work depends on your emotional and personal engagement. And then the third dimension of burnout is a sense of ineffectiveness at work. You feel like your work is not accomplishing anything. In my own case, I would go to class and I just saw these blank faces on the students, and I believed that I wasn't teaching them anything. And so those 3 dimensions together, which can be scored on a survey called the Malesic Burnout Inventory, high scores on those 3 dimensions is a classic case of burnout.
And I think that's really helpful to hear, I think, because that is a very precise definition, isn't it? And it's
Yes.
very different to this kind of, as you were saying, imprecise way that we tend to hear burnout used in general conversations and in society. I guess something that we're seeing a lot in the media nowadays are kind of lots of results of surveys, maybe with dubious methodologies, saying that burnout rates are soaring. So 96% of millennials are burned out. All these very kind of high and alarming figures. I guess my question for you was, as a society, what do you think that we're getting wrong in the discussion about burnout?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that we're getting wrong is that definition. I think that we have this broad amorphous definition of burnout, which gives us incentive to claim burnout, because simultaneously in our societies, one of the highest values, one of the greatest signs of your merit as a person is that you're hardworking. And if you claim burnout, well, then you're claiming that you're so hardworking that you damaged yourself in some way, and you become a kind of martyr. And so I think that the imprecise definition and the overvaluing of work really function together to make burnout culture almost inescapable as we continue to claim this. I mean, burnout is a negative condition, but it's a negative condition that people are very eager to claim for themselves. And you don't see that, for instance, with clinical depression or other mental disorders.
You mentioned earlier about burnout representing the difference between our ideals and the reality of work. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, what you mean by this, and why it's key to, I guess, think about this when we're thinking about combating burnout culture.
We go to work because we want something. And the most basic and universal thing that we want is generally a paycheck. But that's almost never the only thing we want. We also want to prove ourselves. We want to be able to hold our head up high in society and show that we are contributing members of society. We want to demonstrate our moral character. And in some cases, we want this transcendent sense of purpose or meaning or something that borders on a kind of spiritual fulfillment. And I kind of categorize all of those expectations as, primarily dignity, character, and purpose. Those as the the three basic abstract goods that we seek from work. And it's good that we want those things. I mean, we should want those things. You know, a human life should be one of dignity. It should be one of moral character. It should be one of purpose. The problem I think that we run into is that in 21st century society, we have lumped all of those things onto work. So we now expect to find all of those primarily through our jobs. And our employers often all too readily claim, at least, to deliver on those things. You know, come work for us and you'll find your purpose or something like that. You'll contribute to society. And that promise often goes unfulfilled. And I think that leads to a frustration and a deep existential worry that, well, gosh, I mean, has something gone wrong with me? Have I failed? You know, I'm supposed to find all these things. I'm supposed to be totally fulfilled by my job, but in fact, I feel miserable at it. So, you know, people tend to ask, well, what's wrong with me? And the answer is, well, nothing. In fact, you know, the problem has more to do with your workplace and our cultural expectations of work.
My next question was, I suppose, maybe quite a difficult question because these things are complex and nuanced. But if there was kind of one single most important change that every HR or business leader could make in their organization to prevent burnout, what would you say to that?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, the first word that comes to mind is limit. There need to be limits on, you know, the work day, the amount of time and space that the work takes up in the employee's life, so that work doesn't become totalizing. And so that we can keep in mind the humanity of the person who came to this job with goals and wanting to be productive, but those goals also fit into a larger life that they have, and the work is just one part of it. This talk of limits is perhaps a bit abstract, and it may look different, you know, from one organization to another. But I think that on an individual and organizational level, we have to keep in mind that there's always something more important than work, that we're always working for some further purpose. And that's got to be kept in mind. And that needs to define the limits of what the organization does and its role in the employees' lives.
You've said that rest or time off is not a cure for burnout. So I just wanted to ask you why, and if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's not. At least it's not a cure all on its own. And the reason just goes back to that basic definition of, you know, burnout is this gap between ideals and reality. So you can rest, you can take a break from the reality of your work. But if that reality doesn't change in the time that you take a rest, then guess what? You're going to go back to experiencing that gap. You're going to feel the strain very quickly. And so a weekend off, or, a long holiday, or in my case, in the depths of my burnout, I decided to take a semester of unpaid leave. And I not only didn't go to work, I moved 200 miles away. And I had hoped that was going to cure the problem, that I was just really tired and I needed to get away and get some distance from the job. And I came back, and all of that rest worked for about 2 or 3 weeks because and I was right back to where I started. I mean, my burnout just kind of picked up where it left off. And the reason was that nothing about my job had changed. I just went back to the same experience. And of course, I felt that strain once again. And so I'd say, yeah, rest alone is not enough. It has to be perhaps rest plus change. And I'd say, rest works well for ordinary tiredness. You work really hard to finish a project, you're tired, you take a long weekend, you come back and you feel better. That's not burnout. Burnout is when you take that long weekend and you feel just as miserable when you return.
John, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure for me as well.